Hey guys, Jarretman here, back with another 500 Zoom video, picking up exactly where we left off in the last video. So I'm not playing with a HUD, so I don't really have stats on this player. I do think he's potentially a weaker player. However, he might be a reg that uses a limping strategy. I'm not too sure yet. I'm just gonna go for a half pot bet here on table 1, trying to fold out his sixes minus and ace high suiteds, I guess. Maybe we could accomplish that with a 1/3 sizing. However, with our hand, it's not bad to increase the size of the pot. Okay, so it looks like this player is a weaker player. I'm just judging by the speed and sizing of that turn bet. Five six offsuit will mix some raises in optimally, but versus the weaker player, I kind of like to play linear in these spots. And we'll check back our 5. I don't think there's much value in betting, and there's no value in bluffing with the 5 here. I need to find the settings in PokerStars where I can disable the pop-ups taking priority off my screen. This is interesting here. We're not going to do any 4-betting in this exact spot with our hand. We're going to get into a lot of tricky spots like this one here. However, it's pretty. We can play pretty straightforward and not worry too much about being exploited. There's just going to be a lot of value in seeing flops. I like going for the 1/3 sizing. We can get peeled by pocket 10s, even ace king. This player can definitely still have pocket 10s. Interesting river card because we don't block any ace x of clubs and we don't block any besides ace queen and ace jack. But I'm still gonna go for the 1/3 bet here, maybe hoping to get called by a low pocket pair. If one of these players has 10s with the 10 of clubs, if this person potentially check back aces on the flop, if this person check back a queen like king queen, we can get called by all of those hands. But I feel like if I bet bigger on the river, we're just isolating to either lower flushes, which there aren't many of, or sets or 2-pair. And I guess aces with the ace of clubs that check back the flop. However, I think a lot of those aces hands that would check back the flop would end up raising the turn versus my small size. Jack 10 suited versus the slightly larger open. We will be 3-betting a little bit more, but we get the 3-bet regardless here. The reason we 3-bet more versus the larger sizing is that we get a worse price. On our call, so we're more incentivized to 3-bet. So in theory, if he's opening to that size, he should have a slightly tighter small blind range because you're opening to a bigger size, therefore you need to tighten up. So in theory, maybe our 3-betting range could just remain the same but our calling range will need to tighten up a little bit given the worst price that we're getting. King 10 suited, we will call versus a 4-bet on table 2. And this texture, we started slightly deeper, like 110 big blinds deep-ish, but it's not going to affect us too much. I think with this hand class, we just want to check. The button does have a 6x advantage, and we do have the typical overpair and high card equity advantage. But I think this exact hand class just fits into the check fold range. Unless you're playing a strategy where you just bet the flop with range. Or you're playing a strategy where you're just like maybe we mix in some bets on the flop with the king 10 of diamonds. But just from the hands that I remember, I'm pretty sure this hand class just gets check folded. Assuming any sort of reasonable size from the button. When we do check on this texture, we will be playing very aggressively versus his bets. Obviously, we'll have to be folding some hands and calling some hands, but we're going to be check raising a lot more than I think people do, or that people are comfortable with. And those check raises will include like some overcards. I just don't think king 10 of diamonds needs to get in the mix there. This hand's a bit different on table 1. We'll mix a small amount of checks here with the king queen of hearts, but mostly we're going to be betting and betting for the big size. We have the 2 overs. We have the backdoor flush draw. He's not opening 2s pure. We have pocket 9s and all of the over pairs, and he's in sort of a worse spot, I would say. It's not the greatest board for us. It's not like the board is, king high. And I think king queen here. Yeah, I'm going to go for the big bet. So I just realized I'm an idiot. Maybe I shouldn't be playing poker until I drink more coffee. I just realized that we started the hand like 350 big blinds deep. Oh man, I'm such an idiot. I should have three bet. I should have 3-bet to a larger sizing, not too crazy, but a slightly larger sizing. And then on this texture being 350 big blinds deep, I think we're going to be doing a lot more checking than I initially said. He could definitely have all the 2s. He definitely has all the 5s. He definitely has all the 9s. We're going to go for another small bet here, table 2. This is a little bit exploitative. We just want to price in his other flush draws. And, folding out a hand like king 10 isn't terrible. Ace 10 offsuit. I'm still not sure exactly what this player in the hijack is doing in terms of a limping strategy. I haven't seen him raise yet, at least not that I remember. So he could just have a pure limping strategy, which would include some limp re-raises, and in which case ace 10 wouldn't be strong enough to raise from the blinds here. But it is strong enough to continue. So yeah, I actually made a pretty big mistake on the flop here. I think the turn is fine to barrel once we bet the flop. Like, we should still be betting the flop some of the time with king queen of hearts here, and I'd be lying if I told you I knew what to do 350 big blinds deep in this spot exactly, but I do know we will be checking a lot more than I thought we would be in this spot. So yeah, oops. We're not loving it here on table 1. We can fold now, table 2. So we have no club, and we have a very wide range pre-flop because of we checked the big blind. And I don't think we need to call all of our ace X. And do I think he's coming up with enough bluffs here after the turn is the 2 of clubs? And do I think he's ever betting over his ace? I'm leading towards no, and I'm going to make the fold. I think he absolutely can bet ace jack plus on the river for value. And he also has flushes, sets, 4x potentially. So I don't think his value range is that thin or in that polar. And I think his bluffs, it's going to be tough for him to find enough bluffs unless he's limping extremely, extremely wide. 5, 6, 6, 7 are the obvious bluffs that can follow through on the river. But even those, they won't have a club blocker. That one's definitely close. Honestly, though, I think I would rather call, because I don't think he's betting a worse ace for value. I think I would rather call any hand with a club. Because I don't think he's going to find natural offsuit club blocker bluffs on the river. Like, one club and then another offsuit card. So I think his range for bluffs on the river won't even include clubs. So I much rather have a club in my calling range, blocking his flushes. Again, this all depends on how wide he's limping pre-flop. And you can start to level yourself, which you shouldn't do. Ace queen suited, for me, I'm going to pure 3-bet it. Big blind versus cutoff versus hijack. I think you could maybe mix a few calls, but still mostly 3-betting. King jack off, you could even potentially call. I have 2 weaker players behind, so I don't hate a call, but I think the hand plays better as a 3-bet overall. Not to mention we're 200 big blinds deep, so the value of position goes up the deeper you are. So optimally in this spot, button versus cutoff, you don't want to be just betting 1/3 with range. I don't think this is a spot you should be doing that. You have a lot of hands that do not want to bet the flop, like queen or kings through jacks don't want to bet the flop. 10x doesn't really want to bet the flop. Your weak ace x don't really want to bet the flop. And you need to, as soon as you start checking one hand in your range, you need to start balancing that checking range out. I think you lose too much EV by having just a pure betting range here in this spot. And I'm just going to fold the king jack. I was thinking about bluff raising, but again, I don't think it looks that credible. And also, I think he can definitely have a lot of ace x, and we block some of his bluffs that he might have, like king queen, queen jack, maybe jack 8 of spades might float the flop, who knows. So we ISO the limp here on table 2 with 8-9 suited, which I believe is going to be a pure ISO. And then we get this flop, which is better for our range than it is for his range, but we don't absolutely crush him. But it is a much better board for us. Table 1, we roll a check. And we'll be checking back with our 8 and just trying to check our 8 down here, I guess. No reason to turn this one into a bluff. We have other no equity hands that can still check back the turn and then bluff the river. Not to mention we just have worse hands that can turn into a bluff. Like, queen 9 might not always bet the turn. So we do have bluffs. Even low pocket pairs would make a better bluff than that hand. And after the flop goes check, check, we could potentially have an overbet. However, with 2 possible straights being there and the big blind having both possible straights, I like overbetting less. Even though he is a little bit capped, as he will be checking back king queen very, very infrequently, mostly betting king queen on the flop. And 8-9 might even bet the flop a lot as well. So it could be a good spot for you to have an overbet on the turn. Either way, I like our hand to bluff, just blocking both of those straights, as well as having a double gut shot, and the king of diamonds blocker is really nice. So I did see this player open limp under the gun, and now he raises under the gun. So if we had seen some of the hands that he was doing that with, we could make, we could see if he's actually balancing those two ranges. Otherwise his under the gun raising range might be a lot stronger because he's limping some of those marginal hands. That's usually the case, but not always. I just took a sip of cold coffee, and man, that is not good. So table 2, I'm gonna go for the small bet here, not blocking the 8. I would rather check to trap a hand like 9-8 where we block the 8 than I would with pocket 9s. However, pocket 9s could still definitely trap. Letting him see the turn with any hand is obviously great with pocket 9s here. We could potentially just call here on table 1, being deep with a reg and having the big blind be a weaker player, but it's tough. I generally don't play a small blind calling range, and I'm not even sure that this player is a weaker player. Just gonna go for the normal bet here, table 2. We should trap this sometimes, I think, on the turn. It's a bit different on the turn. And table 1 being deep here, I like checking. Like, we're gonna have a sizable checking range being deep. I think it's pretty reasonable. It is a better board for us, but he can still have all of the sets. He can have all 3 sets at basically full frequency here. Excuse me. Again, on the turn, I don't think we need to turn 8s into a bluff here. We could potentially bluff some spade rivers, but yeah. And versus this size on the turn, we can make the fold. We just have to make sure that we're not putting all of our good hands into our betting range on the turn when the king comes, so that we're not over folding when the king comes and he does bet, which I think I'm doing. I'm not over folding when this king comes. I will have some hands that can check call versus the bet. I think 8s just doesn't quite make it. It is close because we have the 8 of spades, but I think it's just below the threshold for what we need to continue. If we had 9-8, we would continue. It's just a better call than 8s. Has more equity when it's behind, as well as being just a better hand in terms of hand rankings. This player's a bit shorter, so I'm going to size down my 3-bet. That's the wrong. So this is interesting here on table 2 because I started 125 big blinds deep. 100 big blinds deep, I think this is just a pure jam. And I'm still going to go for the jam. If we were like 150 big blinds deep, I like calling slightly better. Okay, I'm actually going to call 25% of the time. I think that's a thing here on table 2. But no, we just get the jam. Ace King is the, penultimate bluff hand in these spots. Ace 6 suited having the backdoor flush draw versus the overbet. I don't think we get to fold it here. We do actually, versus this size of an overbet, we do actually fold some ace X on the flop, I believe. Although I could be wrong. How big was that overbet? That was like just over 1.5x pot. Yeah, I think we mix in some folds with some aces versus that sizing. And now we have a nice hand to call down. Again, this is not a fun spot. maybe our ace six by the river might be indifferent in a lot of spots. But on the turn, he can still be betting, ace queen for value. So we have a very, very clear call. Not to mention we're very high up in our range. It's overall a low EV spot for our range because we're so capped. And this player is a very good reg, and he's going to put pressure on our capped range here. We never have ace king. We never have aces. We never have kings. We can have eights. We never have sixes. We never have nines. This is close to the top of our range, actually. Like ace eight might be the top of our range. If he jams the river, it's going to be a very tough spot. Because we also don't have any like 10-7 where he can 100% have 10-7. And yeah, he has queen 10. It's pretty reasonable. I think I would have liked a follow through from him on the river, but if you follow through every single bluff combo that you have on the river, you're going to be way over bluffing, and the big blind can just start calling you with every ace, and yeah, it's no fun. 9-5 suited is a bit of a looser open on the button here, but that's fine. Yeah, I think a jam would have been kind of interesting from his spot on the river. And like we're in a tough spot with ace six if he jams. I think we have to call some of the time. 8-9 suited, just gonna be a fold here. Small blind versus big blind, or small blind versus button. Seems weird to some people, but yeah. Okay, so he bets 1.5. Yeah, just under 1.5 actually. Okay. We call. I don't think we're folding any aces that have backdoor flush draws on the flop, that's for sure. We turn our two pair, so now when he overbets the turn, I think he can still be overbetting with like ace queen. Ace jack I think would be too thin. I think ace queen plus is his overbetting turn range here. Even ace queen's a little bit thin, to be honest. Really good board for us here on table 1. I think we can bet 1/5 with our range. I'm tempted to greedily bet 1/3 on the turn, which it's definitely a thing. Okay, we get a bet, but I think this hand wants to be checking the turn back at a decent frequency as well. Okay, so he bets 1.5x pot on the turn again. Makes sense. He's uncapped. We're capped. He's putting a lot of pressure on our weak range. Everything looks good so far. And then on the river, we're even more capped now because we never have 7-5 of clubs. We never have 10-7 because we wouldn't float the flop for that size. We are as capped can be. Like he has aces, he has kings, he has ace king. He has not all the sets, but more sets than we do. He has the straights where we do not have any of the straights. He could, depending how often he's overbetting those combos on the flop, he could have like, 4 to 8 combos of straights. So yeah, I think this is a good spot to just jam whatever that is, like 5x pot, 4x pot. And I think queen 10 off should be jamming, maybe. But the problem with queen 10 off is you look at it initial and you think like, okay, it's got decent blockers because, it blocks 10-7, but we never have 10-7. So it doesn't actually block much. Like ace queen is going to be mostly 3-betting pre-flop. This deep, I might be calling it some of the time, but he doesn't really block ace queen. So I think you're like, 4x, 3x pot jams on the river want to be exactly 6x or 8x. Blocking our pocket 8s, blocking our pocket 6s, blocking our ace 6, blocking our ace 8. And then when you get to me and you're facing the huge 4x river pot shove, you're just not in a good spot. You're capped as hell. You don't have to call very much versus that size. Like you can call basically just you're going to be choosing just from your like ace 8, ace 6 type hands. And if he's using 6x as a bluff, maybe you never even want to call a6. Yeah, I know I'm spending a lot of time on this hand, but I do think it's a very interesting spot, and 100% it's a spot where if I put this into the solver will have some jams in the buttons, shoes, jamming for like the huge jam here. Fours with the diamond is going to peel versus the 1/4 sizing here. We're going to mix in a very small percentage of raises, like 5% of raises. We'd rather raise 7s with the 7s of diamonds or 5s with the 5 of diamonds. Actually, maybe 4s with the 4 diamonds doesn't even mix any raises. So yeah, cool hand here. Cool hand here in the replayer. If he had jammed the river, I think I would have like called 5% of the time with my a6. I think maybe that's a thing. Yeah, pretty cool. And we're gonna bluff here on table 1. Just gonna go for the normal size. I don't think the overbet makes as much sense. I want to bet a size that I can bet with a 7. And I think I can bet the size with a 7 the way that the action went. And if I overbet, I kind of just ISO myself. And having the 4 of diamonds on that run out actually doesn't block any of his flushes because he doesn't have any 4x of diamonds flush combos. So we're just bluffing because it's near bottom of range. Like, because, you know, I block 5-4 of diamonds, but the 5 is out there, and I block ace-4 of diamonds, but the ace is out there, so I actually don't block any flushes. So maybe this hand actually doesn't make it into the bluffing range, and we bluff like our king, queen with the king of diamonds floats on the flop because he bet 1/4. And we turn those into a bluff on the river, and this one can just check back because it beats like his jack 10, queen 10, queen jack, king jack give ups. Yeah, so maybe, yeah, actually looking back on that hand, that might have been a mistake. Let me see if I can pull that hand up. I'm gonna check that hand later because that's kind of interesting to me. And I would check that hand against Davy Jones later, but it's a very, very deep spot. It's gonna take a lot of resources to run that spot, and it's not a spot that's gonna come up very often. But I might still run it just because it's so interesting. At least it's interesting to me. Okay, I'll check that one later. Table 1, we roll a 3-bet with our pocket 8s. We're playing cutoff versus hijack as a 3-bet or fold. So 8s is going to be like a 25% 3-bet, 75% fold, something like that. And then when we face the 4-bet, after we 3-bet the 8s, we don't do any folding. And when we brick out on this texture with pocket 8s, we can fold, I believe. Yeah, we can fold. Jack 10 offsuit you could potentially open in the hijack there, but it's low EV open. You know, a strategy in Zoom, which some regulars do to success, I think, is that when you're playing Zoom and you fold, you get to see the next hand immediately. And if you're a winning player, by definition, a random hand will be plus EV on average. Otherwise, you're not a winning player. So by folding these marginal opens, you actually get to see more hands per hour, and therefore you get to see more plus EV spots per hour, where that open might be, you know, 0 EV at equilibrium. So it's not a crazy strategy to just tighten your preflop ranges to the point where you're playing only the hands that are pure opens and not playing any, like pure continues, and not playing any of the hands that are mixed continues. I think that's somewhat reasonable. Interesting spot here at table 1. We do block his jack X, but otherwise just a very low equity hand. We're going to go for the 1/3 stab, though. I don't think it's terrible here in this spot. Maybe it doesn't make as much sense with our range. because maybe we don't want to stab those low pairs enough. Queens could mix a small percentage of calls versus under the gun, by the way, but so now this board, in this case, button versus under the gun, is much better than if we were button versus cutoff. Button versus cutoff, he flops 3 sets. Here he only flops 1 set like 25% of the time. And I think we can go for the big sizing, just putting a lot of pressure on his, you know, 8s, his 9s, his 10s. He has ace king that has to peel versus this sizing, like only 25% of the time, but still. He can have jacks that don't want to 4-bet preflop. And yeah, versus the raise, he can be doing this as like a protection raise with jacks, as spade combos, as everything. And you might see the solver, like, I believe the solver is just gonna mix calls here and mix raises sometimes, like mix jams sometimes. But I feel like in reality, this is very often just a protection raise with jacks and 10s, which is totally fine. When I have queens, it's good, but good for me. But versus the rest of my range, this raise will do well. And you just have to stack off when you do the protection raise. And we're gonna fold here, table 1. This is another weird spot. Maybe we have to peel 8s at low frequency, but I don't really like it. And I guess he's considering folding his 10s or jacks that he raised as a protection raise. Because if he had a flush draw, he would have called already by now. And I don't think there's any other hand that can tank here. Like ace, if you raised ace 5 of hearts, you just snap fold, I think, given the price. No, maybe you do have the equity to call with ace 5. Okay, maybe he is tanking with a hand like ace 5 of hearts. Maybe he raised big enough that he has the equity to call. Yeah, he has 8s. I don't think that's as much of a thing. In fact, I don't think that's a thing at all. If he raised 8s there, I think that means he thinks I'm getting pretty out of line on the spot, like betting way too much for the large size on the flop, like potentially even betting range. Because with these tighter positions, you know, button versus under the gun, raising 8s for protection here doesn't have a lot of value. It's just, you don't benefit enough from the protection to justify the times when you get stacked by all the overpairs that are better than you. And you never stack like a worse pair here with 8s. Like very rarely. Like I'm not rejamming, you know, 6s, 5s, 3s, 7-8 suited, 7-6 suited on the flop. Like you might gain a little bit of value in the sense that I might peel those on the flop, or I will peel those on the flop potentially, like the 7x at least. But then you're just in a very, very tricky spot on every single turn. There's no good turns besides the offsuit ace, the offsuit 8. So yeah, this is not a thing. With jacks and 10s, however, it is a little bit of a thing because those hands still benefit from protection, but they have the chance to stack like a lower overpair. Not to mention they just have more equity in general versus my range because they just have higher cards. Whereas, you know, 8s, if I have 10-9 of spades, jack 10 of spades, I'm winning versus 8s. But if he has jacks and I have jack 10 of spades, he's crushing me. So yeah, I think that's just not a thing. But he might have exploitative reasons to do that versus me, which maybe makes sense. Maybe he thinks that I bet the flop way too frequently, in which case the proper deviation would be to check raise 8s and just get it in which case maybe don't tank. Just gonna value check our ace jack here. I think this is a nice little check call spot, but this player tends to be a little bit more on the passive side. Tends to bet with his very strong hands and check back his medium and weaker hands. Five four offsuit's kind of close here. I think this hand is the type of hand that gets shifted into the calling range. So yeah, we'll make the call. Like, I'd rather call this hand than ace-6 offsuit or ace-8 offsuit or ace-9 offsuit. And the equity with our gut shot just isn't quite strong enough, I think, to have any leads here. At least not, yeah, at least not a high percentage of the time. Maybe if we had the 5 of diamonds or the 4 of diamonds, we could potentially lead for the small size. But, you know, our equity when called is pretty atrocious in this spot. But now on the river, we're going to have a lot of, you know, board type hands. And we roll a 97, so we are going to bet this one. And we're going to bet it for the small size, just repping like, you know, a queen X or like an ace jack type hand, which can definitely bet for this size. But if we bluff every single one of our no equity hands on the river, we'll be over bluffing, which is why I use the random number generator. We just have so many candidates here, right? Like, we have tons and tons of candidates that are no pair. How long have we been going here? 36 minutes. Okay, I'm going to try to do an hour in this video just because my last video was very short. Like I said, I'm just going to try to mix up the lengths of these videos. Ace-10 offsuit not strong enough to continue versus the hijack open. Ace-queen offsuit will be strong enough to continue. It's less fun 3-betting these offsuit Broadway hands when we are deeper, as they tend to not play as well deeper, but I think ace-queen offsuit is still, it would be still too weak to consider folding there. Small blind versus under the gun, yeah, I'm already considering folding it even just 100 big blinds deep, so I think 200 big blinds deep would be a pretty reasonable fold. So he's not completely capped on this board because he can have ace-king, especially this deep. He might even have like ace-king pure, depending on the type of player that he is. He might 4-bet like ace-king suited some of the time, but call ace-king offsuit pure. And the 3 is a bad card for our exact hand because now we chop with all the other ace-x. So the majority of the value of our hand now is going to come from bluff catching rather than value betting, as we chop with all aces. He might be capped in the sense that he doesn't have aces and kings, but not capped as someone usually would be on like a ace-king X board in this spot. I do have this player marked as a weaker player, but I think that might be a mismark. Not loving it, but we're going to call. Again, the value of our hand is going to be bluff catching. We don't block any clubs, which is nice. That's going to be his main bluffing hand. Otherwise, like, you know, 4-5 suited. I don't think this player necessarily is going to start to get creative with the low pairs, which might be some of the hands that need to bluff optimally. So I think on the river we'd be in a very tough spot. Interesting, he bets the king on the turn. If he does bet the king on the turn, obviously his intention is to check back the river. Maybe he's just trying to extract value from, you know, my flush draws that decided to check the turn. If I was him, I think I'd mostly check back the king 10 suited on the turn though. Probably pure check it back. Table 2, this hand class is one of the hand classes that likes to check back the flop very frequently. Ace 10 would check back more than ace 9, however, because the 9 has some backdoor straight draw potential. And we're in a weird spot here, table 1. Like, how credible is it if I raise the river here with a queen? And do I think I'm really good here? Like, 1 in 6 times or whatever I need to be. Maybe not. I know this is a call optimally, but in reality, it's maybe you're just never good there. I don't know. You know, if the river was a card that changes a few things that improves some of my hands, I would consider bluff raising versus that small size potentially, but on the brick 5, I think it's not extremely credible for us to raise, like, you know, versus some regulars where, you know, I'll have like an optimal check back range on the turn, which will include some like small percentage of straights. Then on this river, you know, facing that action, I'll have to do a small percentage of bluff raises as well, because I'm going to have the nuts at some frequency. I'm going to have the straights at some frequency. You know, I'll have 5s with the 5 of hearts at some frequency. So I'll include some bluffs, but in this spot, I'm less inclined to include some bluffs with this hand class, and I probably should just folded. Gonna make the fold versus the half pot bet here. Just a little small thing here. If this player with a 35 big blind stack was in the cutoff or the button, I would lower my raise size to a smaller raise size, like maybe even a min raise here. Just because of the short stack behind makes it less appealing to open for a larger size. Just because he gets to leverage his stack size. Versus a large bet on table 2, we would fold the 10-9 with no backdoor flush draw. Just being reversed on a queen is not very nice, and hitting a 10 or a 9 we're very reversed as well. But versus the 1/3 sizing, I don't think we get to fold this. I don't like putting in the raise with this combo though. You know, I guess we never have 10-9 with a backdoor flush draw here because we would 3-bet all of the suited 10-9s pure pre-flop. However, we don't have to worry about being capped on a queen because we will have ace-10. And we can check raise some ace-10 small frequency on the flop. Maybe we're supposed to check raise small frequency 10-9 as well, but I don't like it as much, to be honest. 10-9's already a garbage hand. It looks better than it is. At first glance, it looks better than it is on this flop. If you think about what turns you could hit and how they interact with his range, I think you can realize that it's not that good of a hand. I did see this player open limp before, and now I see him go for the raise. So again, this might be a spot where his raises would be stronger than they're supposed to be because he's limping the marginal hands. I'm not exactly sure yet. And you want to just kind of play solid poker and not worry too much about exploits on very small samples, in my opinion. At least when you're playing this pool, I don't know. This pool overall I find pretty tough, so I could have opened the king 7 offsuit versus those blinds, but again, like I was saying, either in this video or a previous video, I kind of don't go out of line too crazy in my pre-flop adjustments. Gonna bet again here. It's gonna be a bet fold on table 1. I'm betting small targeting his non-ace X hands is what I'm doing. So if he floated the flop with like a king queen or king 10 suited type hand, backdoor flush draw, I'm targeting those hands. He does have the ace, which is a little unfortunate as I missed out on a decent amount of value choosing the 1/3 size on the turn. However, I thought in the moment it was more valuable to target his hands that are not ace X, as you know, we block an ace, and using that small sizing also still gets value from an ace. Maybe that logic isn't correct. The river, I like betting for the small size though, because if I bet too big, I think some of his ace X could potentially find folds. Like if I went for like a pot or slightly overbet pot size. Like if I'm just targeting ace X, I guess I would go for like a 75-60% bet on the river. I just thought his range could be wide enough that I could get called by non-ace X hands as well. Maybe that's too ambitious. And yeah, maybe that type of thinking would be better when I had a hand like ace 5, where I don't beat his other ace X. But when I have ace queen that beats his other ace X, I should go for the larger size. And I could get behind that. Queen 9 suited, again in the sandwich spot. I'm just going to fold. The queen 9 suited doesn't actually play that well multi-ways. So yeah, maybe I made a mistake with the ace queen here, but I'm trying not to be too biased for the results. I'm just trying to think about the hand overall, and if I wanted to play exploitative and just focus on my exact holdings, then I like the line that I took, the small size. I like it with a weak ace X, and then I like the normal bigger size with ace queen. So yeah, just a small mistake there. Pocket 8's going to be folding. He used a bit of a larger 3-bet size as well. So we're going to be folding slightly more, 4-betting slightly more. Not to mention we're deeper, so it's kind of, the deeper you are, the worse it is to play out of position. Okay, this spot's interesting because the button uses a huge 3-bet size and he's short. Obviously, we're not looking to grab being a bad beat here. Being a bad beat is going to realize that I am extremely value heavy when I cold 4-bet this spot. So I don't think I think he's going to find folds with hands like 10s or jacks or something, but that's not going to change if I just cold called here. I don't know. 5-7 suited, we rolled a call. Going to be mixing like 25% of 3-bets here. He does fold table 2. I was thinking about just jamming to make it look kind of suspicious to potentially a weaker player, but then I definitely don't stack being a bad beat when he does have like queens, I think. And very low percentage raise with the 5-7 of clubs hand class here, I think, on the flop. Mostly just calling. We have enough, you know, straight draw, flush draw type hands that can increase the size of the pot. As well as, you know, ace X of clubs type hands. I like his choice of sizing on the turn. It's a sizing he can bet with non-flush value hands still. And with our low flush, I like check raising him. The hands that we're going to include as quote-unquote bluff hands are going to be, you know, 9-8 with the 8 of clubs that peeled the flop, 7-8 offsuit with the 8 or 7 of clubs. We have lots of offsuit club combos that we can check raise him here, and we're going to mix between a lot of those combos. Like, you know, queen 8 with the queen of clubs, queen 8 with the 8 of clubs, etc., etc. Just a lot of bluff candidates to choose from. And now being capped on the river, and we get a relatively low number, I'm going to go for the check. I do think this player especially is a decent reg who can come up with some bluffs here, recognizing that my range is capped and turning some pairs into a bluff on the river, because he's going to float with some hands on the river, or sorry, float with some hands on the turn that might just have like a naked club, potentially even like, you know, pocket jacks, pocket queens that can now turn themselves into a bluff on the river, but as well as other just queen X type hands like queen 8 offsuit he could have as well. And he can also have the he can also have flushes and better hands as well. But once we check the river, we're not check folding versus a normal size. We are extremely capped in the sense that I think the best hand we can have, like, we don't have really any full houses, to be honest. So the best hand we can have is like the queen high flush, which he has it, and I really think he should be using an overbet sizing. I think the worst hand he wants to bet for value is a hand that is like a flush or a full house. I don't think he ever wants to like even bet a king on the river. So I think if that's the case, he wants to be betting extremely polar, and I think it's a mistake not to use like an overbet sizing, because I'm extremely capped, extremely capped. Yeah, I think if I had the queen high flip, like maybe if he has a hand like I have, like if he has 5-7 of clubs, he doesn't want to go for the overbet because then he's really only getting called by worse hands. So he wants to go for the normal bet. So maybe you want to have two sizes here, a normal bet and an overbet, in which case you have to, you know, balance both ranges appropriately. But I think that even like his small flushes might just want to check back the river. And when he has the queen high flush, I think he definitely wants to go for an overbet. So yeah, overall, I don't like the decision to go for the normal bet. When your opponent's capped, you got to put him to the test. You got to put the pressure on. And if you never include, you know, value hands, and let's say you did have like queen 8 with the queen of clubs and you go for the overbet here, which is fine. It's a fine play. You should do that. But if you go for the overbet with that hand and then never overbet with your strong hands, you just go for the normal bet, then your opponent can just start calling you whenever you overbet. So all right, I think I'm gonna wrap this video up. We're close to an hour here, so I'm just gonna play to my big blinds, and that's gonna be it for this one. I know I'm really talking about this river spot way too much, but especially when you have like queen 6 with the 6 of clubs, because you don't block as many flushes when you have the lower card. Like queen 2 would be a better candidate because you block even less of my flushes. But you know, if you had queen jack of clubs, maybe I could understand going for the normal bet more because you block some of my higher flushes. But yeah, anyways, talk too much about this hand. Table 1 on the turn. I don't think we want to be betting too often here. We can bluff catch the river. It's a pretty nice bluff catch hand, actually. I think the 8 of spades blocks more value than it does bluffs. And I'm actually expecting to lose pretty often, but not needing to turn the ace high into a bluff here. Just beating his other ace highs is a thing. Like beating ace 3 is a thing. Beating 8-6 is a thing. All right, just approaching my last hands here. 4-6 suited, not strong enough to open from the cutoff. And I think this will be it. All right, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video.